Good morning, everyone. I thought we should maybe get started. My name is Lindsay Curley, and I am the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And I am here today with members of Governor Scott's extended cabinet, and we'll let them introduce themselves in just a minute. But before that, I wanted to take a minute to thank Pat Ripley, who's standing in the back of the room. Pat, thank you. And Tasha Wallace, who is also in the back of the room. Both of them were great partners to us, and also for getting this beautiful facility secured for us today so that we could host you all for this event. And we're calling this our ARPA tour. And for many of you, you may have heard that we received $2.7 billion in federal American Rescue Plan money. And Governor Scott has proposed strategic investments in very transformative projects around the state to really put us on a path to recovery and making our communities stronger. And what we're doing is we're traveling around the state and we're talking about the different programs that we have to try to get those investments into your community. And so what we'll do here in a few minutes is, as folks introduce themselves, they'll do a very quick, what I call an elevator pitch, like 3 minutes, to tell you about what they have within their agencies or departments to deploy for money. But really the idea is to kind of get the juices flowing so that you can be thinking about it. And the goal is to shift this to all of you so we can hear from you about what's on your minds, what your needs are. Because again, the end goal is to help get the money to all of you here in Lamoille County. And so in order to do that, like I said, I want you to hear a little bit about what we do have, and then hear from you about what your needs are, what your ideas are, and how we can help you going forward and get the money into Lamoille County. I just, before I come up here to the front of the table, I just wanted to mention that we do have a member of the governor's senior staff in the back of the room, Kendall Smith. Kendall, if you want to introduce yourself really quick. I just did, but tell them what you do.
Sure. Kendall Smith, I'm Governor Scott's policy director and legislative liaison, and just here listening to any questions you all have back to the governor.
Great. Thanks, Kendall. And with that, I know a lot of, we'll try to keep it fairly ARPA focused, but you're going to hear a little bit about programs that kind of, I say, nibble around the edges, because there are other programs that braid or blend or stack really well. You'll hear different words with the federal dollars that we have. So we're not going to tell you about everything we have, but we're going to give you a little bit of a flavor. So with that, Anson, since you're sitting next to me, I'm going to let you go first.
Well, good morning, all. Anson Tebitz, Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Great to be here in Lamoille County, and going to talk about a few of our programs. Let's begin with the Working Lands program. The Working Lands Enterprise program works for farm and forest operations. So think of maybe a cheese processor that maybe wants to expand. That could be an opportunity. Maybe it's someone who produces firewood. That would be an opportunity. Maybe someone who makes wood pellets. That's an opportunity. These are grants that are managed from the Agency of Agriculture. There's an independent board that reviews them. And a critical part of that is that it helps along the economic chain that relates to the working land, so someone making their living off the land. So for dairy, it may support, for example, a cheesemaker, maybe buying some milk from some other dairies, so that's supporting them as well as their operations. So the Working Lands program, last year we had about $4 million. The governor would like to put another $4 million into the budget if it's approved by the legislature this year. It's working its way through that process now, but $4 million going back to people that are making their living off either farming, growing vegetables, or possibly working lands in the woods and the forestry industry. So that's a program that we manage. Another one I want to highlight is we're fortunate to have something called the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center with Vermont. This is a regional program that's fully funded. Right now we have programs out that increase capacity for processing. For example, there's a program out right now, about $13 million. It's available for anyone that wants to do more processing within the region. We've found during agriculture that's one thing that we need more of. Value added is a key component of dairy now. So thinking about butter, cheese, ice cream, etc., yogurt. That program is out there. So increasing the capacity for that. That is a granting program, not a loan. There are other programs within that as well. There could be grazing programs. There could be marketing programs. So the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is another opportunity for us. Another one that we hope to get accomplished and across the finish line this year with the legislature is a new $10 million program. We believe that we need to, certain sectors are not eligible always for some of our programs, but they need support. And one of those is maple. So this would be maple, meat would be another one, and also fruits and vegetables. The governor has proposed a $10 million granting program using some state dollars to support more processing within those regions. So if we get that approved by the legislature and by the middle of May, that is a wonderful opportunity, some money we've never seen before at that level, and that again would help with processing. It has been endorsed by the House Agriculture Committee and Forestry Committee and the Food Resiliency Committee, so that's important. Now it's making its way to the Senate, and they're debating it as well. So those are just a few of our programs. We have many more. If anyone would like to reach me, just reach out. I can give you some more details about those. But it's all about trying to improve our food system, our food security program, and all those are very important to feeding our region, but also making sure that we take care of the less vulnerable. So that's the word from the Agency of Ag.
Hi, I'm Joan Goldstein. I'm the Commissioner of Department of Economic Development, and our department has been managing a number of programs. The most sort of impactful or the most appropriation that we received from the ARPA appropriation was $40 million for the Community Recovery and Revitalization Program. You might have heard about it. We just announced our first round of grantees. We allocated about $10 million to various people around the state. The people who are qualified to apply for this grant opportunity are if you are doing a project with affordable housing, or a project with childcare, or you're in an impacted industry such as arts, tourism, education, or agriculture. Also, if you're a municipality that needs a water, wastewater improvement project or expansion project that's connected to housing or an economic development project, you're also eligible. There are a number of qualified census tracts around the state, and you can find that on our website. We have a mapping tool where you can put in an address of a particular project and find out if you are in a qualified census tract. And then all those other categories I talked about, you don't have to be in those categories. You have a little bit more free reign. So there's a variety of projects. This is a very versatile tool. It's meant primarily for capital investments. So if you have a project where you're improving facilities or expanding facilities or need equipment, as an example, you can get up to $1 million or 20% of the project cost, the lesser of. So we still have funding in this project, but it is very popular. We have a long queue of applications to still work through, and we will be making announcements as we get a sizable, substantial portion of the applicants. The other pot of money we have, which is not as much in quantity, but very, very impactful, are the Brownfields Revitalization Funds and the Remediation Fund. And that, over the last few years, we've asked the legislature, and they have agreed to create an opportunity for us to fund either municipal, nonprofit, or for-profit developers who want to take contaminated property and redevelop and put something good on that and make better use of that property. And typically these are very expensive and lengthy projects, so we feel this is a great use of state money to help catalyze that investment. It's been extremely popular. We still have money left from the last legislative session, but we are going after another $10 million for this purpose. And that's all administered through our department. I think, Tate, are you talking about NVRC?
Sure.
Okay. And then we have Northern Border Regional Commission that I'll let Tate
Sure.
speak to, if that's all right.
Good segue. So Tate Brooks, I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. As the Commissioner was just kind of touching upon in regards to the economic development side, we also have a department that focuses on housing and community development. before I jump into the Northern Border Regional Commission, which is a multi-state commission which covers Northern New York, all of Vermont, Northern New Hampshire, Northern Maine. I just want to pivot back to housing a little bit. I don't think anybody's been hearing anything about housing, right, over the last few years? No? Maybe? But one program I certainly wanted to highlight here this morning that got certainly a kickstart with the ARPA dollars was our Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which we call VHIP. That's a program that is available and is utilized to rehab existing buildings, maybe buildings that are out of code, not safe, and currently not occupied. And owners of that property are eligible up to $50,000 to upgrade, make code improvements to that building. It also is available for owner-occupied homes for individuals and families that wish to add an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU. And so we're currently partnering with our home ownership centers across the state. I believe it's Downing Street Housing here in Lamoille County, and certainly wanted to highlight that. Back to what Commissioner Goldstein was indicating, we have a program that's administered by the agency, again, Northern Border Regional Commission, and that allows for federal dollars up to $1 million to be used for infrastructure projects, to do improvements in regards to facilities, and we'll actually be having a notification probably in another month for both municipalities and for nonprofits to apply. But it's really geared more towards for infrastructure. The other thing I want to just kind of highlight is that it's our agency and department that deals with the bylaw modernization. So we still have grants that are available to municipalities to take a look at their current zoning. Many municipalities haven't updated their zoning in decades, quite frankly, and are encouraging folks to work with their select board and planning commissions. And there may be some opportunities. There are a number of designated communities in Lamoille County. So we deal with designations as far as like designated downtowns. So Stowe, as an example, has a designated downtown. There's a number of designated villages here in Lamoille County. And again, those designations allow for regulatory relief, permitting relief in regards to fees, and then provides for an opportunity for some other designations, such as like the neighborhood designated area, which again provides some regulatory and financial relief. So why don't I stop there, and I'm sure there may be questions later.
Yeah, that sounds great. And we've skipped Deputy Secretary Doug Barnum, and you'll understand why. But we'll come back. We'll keep rolling down to Catherine.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Delnau. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Libraries and the State Librarian. We have a really exciting opportunity, well, two really exciting opportunities coming up for capital projects to improve public libraries in the state of Vermont. The state has submitted a proposal to the U.S. Department of Treasury to have $16.4 million allocated toward capital improvements in public libraries. Those funds would be specifically to address some of the issues that we saw during the COVID-19 health emergency, where libraries across the country were closing because of facilities issues. We know how important it is for people in our communities to access libraries because they have the internet, and that's so important for work, education, and health monitoring. So these particular funds are really meant to help libraries maintain access to the public, to have internet access, high-speed internet access. So many Vermonters don't have that at home, and so public libraries serve a really vital role in the communities. I'm sure some of you remember local libraries closing in your communities, and that's what we'd like to be able to avoid in the future. So we envision that eligible projects will make the libraries more accessible to everyone. A lot of our libraries in Vermont haven't been renovated in a long time and haven't had any improvements to ADA access. So really making sure that every Vermonter can get through the doors and get to the computer is really important. Eligible projects might also be projects that help to increase ventilation, so the circulation of air through the space and even the filtration of the air that's in the space. And then some of our libraries have some kind of fundamental issues right now. We're hearing about libraries that have water infiltration through windows, or brick that needs to be repointed, or even roofs that have holes in them. So that would be of concern. So we want to be sure that these libraries continue into the future. So in addition to those U.S. Treasury capital projects, we also, the Department of Libraries applied for congressionally directed spending, and we received that award of $10 million specifically for small and rural libraries in Vermont, public libraries. And we envision that some of the same types of projects will be eligible. Those projects won't have to have such a focus on internet accessibility. They could be a little bit broader in what's eligible. But we will be, at the department, having one grant application for both sets of federal funds. Right now, we have a needs assessment that we have launched, and we are asking public library directors and municipalities, if it's a municipal library, to file a needs assessment with us, to fill that out and let us know what projects you have coming up, so that we can begin building out the grant program to both grant programs to best support Vermont's public libraries. The needs assessment is, we plan to have it open through the 31st of March, so there's still time to get it done. We want to know about your project, even if you haven't done very much planning toward your project. It's okay, just let us know about the project and where you are in the process, so that we can understand really the scope of the projects that need to be done to ensure that we have great public libraries and our facilities are up to snuff for the coming years. So if you have any questions, there are 2 flyers at the back of the room on the table, one dedicated to each of the specific funds, and we have a web page. We just did a webinar when we launched the needs assessment, and we'll do more webinars and community messaging as we launch the grant program.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Fitch, and I am the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, and it's actually a good segue and interplay to the program that we have available to offer free municipalities. So last year, there was a legislative initiative that was put forward by Secretary Moore at A&R to make community centers more resilient. At the same time, there was another legislative initiative to fuel switch, and those 2 legislative initiatives came together in what's called the Municipal Energy Resilience Program. So by a raise of hands,
Can you speak louder?
by a raise of hands, who here represents a municipality? Wonderful. This program is just for you, and that's what's important to know. So really what this program is, it's a $45 million program, and it has 4 major components. The first component was a $2.4 million grant award to the regional planning commissions to provide additional capacity to buildings and general services. So by doing so, basically, we're sort of the overarching leader in this program, but then the RPCs are partnering with us to then work with all of their member towns. So really, if you have questions about this program, I would go to your local RPC. Is there anyone here today from a regional planning commission? Can you raise your hand? Oh, hi. So they're all here.
The staff stand up actually because we have a lot of people who can have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming. That's so great. So those grant awards went out, I want to say, around 6 to 8 weeks ago, and we've been working very closely and basically running to get this program off the ground. So that was the first part of the program. The second part of the program, and we just announced this recently, is an up to $4,000 mini grant. It's very easy to apply. You just go right online to our website. Again, the RPCs can help direct you there. You apply for the $4,000 mini grant. If you apply, we're going to provide it for you. So really what that grant is for is twofold. One is to just start building capacity within your individual towns for what energy resilience really means to you and your community. The other part is that it can be used for planning. So if you want technical assistance in identifying candidate municipal buildings, or you need some assistance filling out grant applications. And the last one is ADA. So if you need someone to help start assessing ADA in your facilities, they can help with that as well. So that's really what that second opportunity is. It is out right now. We just released it the day after town meeting day, and basically we're going to leave it open on a rolling application basis. So that one will be open for a while. The next, the third component of this program are energy resilience assessments. There are two types. There's one that's similar to a walk around, what we call like level 1 assessment. And that's really just someone's going to come around and look at your building and walk around and look at your heating system, look at your walls and your windows, different things like that, and give you what we would call more high level what you should do to your building. The second one is what we call a level 2 assessment, which is really an investment grade audit. So with that one, a community needs to have a little bit more information on their building. So whatever you've had for energy usage of your building will need bills over the last 3 years or so. Any types of plans on your building, any sort of information about your heating, venting, and cooling systems, all of those things need to be available in order to do this level 2 assessment. So one is easier but gives you less information. The second one requires more from the community but will provide more detailed information about what you could do to make your building more energy efficient and resilient. And then the last one, which is the big one, is up to $500,000 grants to make municipal buildings more energy efficient and resilient. And that's really going to be focused on weatherization and fuel switching as well as heat pumps. And when we're fuel switching, we're going to more renewable fuel sources. So that's really the meat and potatoes of what the funding is for, but we can bring in some other elements as well. And if your building is not ADA compliant, up to 20% of the grant may be used to make your building, to lead towards ADA compliance in your building. So that's what that program is about. I also want to note, because Deputy Secretary Farnham is here, originally this was an ARPA program, which was really confining what we would be able to do with the program. Thank you to Deputy Secretary Farnham. He used revenue loss replacement, and what that means is now it acts like state dollars instead of federal dollars. What that also means to your municipality is that you can use it as match funding, because again, it's considered a state match or state dollars, and so you can use those state dollars to match other programs and leverage those for additional ARPA awards. So it's a really exciting opportunity. This program is just for municipalities, which I know is more rare. We are partnering not only with the regional planning commissions, but we're partnering with Efficiency Vermont, and we're partnering with, help me out, Brian, I missed a couple. That's right, so Efficiency Vermont, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Katie Buckley is amazing. She's been very supportive of this program, and as you said, the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network. So we have lots of partners. They're all helping us. We've got a lot of money to get out the door really quickly, so we're all working very collaboratively together to support all the municipalities, and we're really excited to bring this to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephanie Smith, representing Vermont Emergency Management today. I'm the program manager for our hazard mitigation program. Prior to this ARPA funding, I managed FEMA hazard mitigation funding, the majority of which would go towards flood risk. But in using that funding, we realized there were some pretty significant gaps in what we were able to fund within communities. So enter our new ARPA program, which is the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, which we're using to fill some of those gaps. So if you're a municipality or if you represent a nonprofit and there's flood risk in your community, I would love to hear from you. We still have all of that FEMA funding available, so you don't necessarily need to know what might be a better fit under that pot or what might be a better fit under ARPA, but if you have flood risk and you want to talk to me, I would love to hear about it. We can fund anything from an assessment of your entire community to look at what are your options. We did something like that in Jeffersonville a few years ago, which was very impactful to come up with a few specific projects to help them reduce their risk in the best possible way. We can start at that scale. We could look at a specific structure and help you figure out in one area where you have a problem, what you might be able to do to reduce that risk. We're also funding property buyouts. So if you have a developed parcel that really shouldn't be where it is, we can demolish and maintain that space as open space so that the river has access to it if it needs it during a flood event. We can also purchase with this program vacant parcels. So if there's something that would have flood risk and is developable but really shouldn't be because the river needs it, we can do that sort of thing too. We have a couple of floodplain restoration projects that we're working on within Lamoille County right now where we're giving the river space, so trying to reduce some fill that's been added over time. So when we do have a flooding event and the water comes up, it has somewhere to go. That's not your neighborhoods and your downtowns. So there's a large range of things that we're able to fund, but if you have flood risk, I would love to chat with you after this, and I have a couple of handouts as well. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources, and I'm going to talk about a suite of water infrastructure programs that we have available at ANR. In total, there's about $230 million worth of ARPA funding that's been committed to water infrastructure projects. And it really falls into 5 big categories, 3 of which I think are particularly germane to Lamoille County communities, so I'm going to spend my time there. The first of which is the Village Water and Wastewater Initiative that also includes money for some rural infrastructure projects. And so the target communities here are smaller Vermont towns that may not already have a community scale drinking water or wastewater system, and have found that that is a limiting factor to growth. One of the communities we're working with currently is Wolcott, but know that there are other communities in Lamoille County that have similar challenges. In addition, there's a bucket of funding that's specifically available for rural communities that need to make investments in refurbishing existing drinking water systems. There's about $5 million available to support that work, recognizing that smaller systems, particularly those operated by fire districts and other sub-municipal jurisdictions, often have a hard time keeping rates affordable while keeping up with operation and maintenance. We are also running what's called the Healthy Homes program, and that has actually 2 components. One is we are running periodic application periods soliciting applications from individual homeowners with failed or failing wells and septic systems. Depending on income level, this can cover the full cost of replacing a failed or failing system. We've run 2 rounds of applications so far and received about 2,000 applications statewide and anticipate running a 3rd round at the end of this calendar year. In fact, the demand for this program has been so significant that the governor's budget and appears to have strong support from the legislature includes $10 million of one-time general fund to extend this program beyond what we're able to do with ARPA dollars. And then the other component of the Healthy Homes program is an initiative specifically targeting infrastructure and manufactured housing communities, helping make investments in drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. Again, we've had 1 round of applications at this point. There were 2 or 3 manufactured housing communities in Lamoille County that did apply and receive funding, and we anticipate, excuse me, announcing another round of grants later, grant application opportunities later this year. And the final component I want to touch on is we have a pretreatment capacity initiative. We're actually going to have a press conference later today celebrating the first round of investments, but this is generally fostering partnerships between municipalities and food and beverage industries. Food and beverage industries tend to have an impact on our smaller municipal wastewater treatment facilities because of the kinds of wastewater they generate. It tends to be really rich and difficult for municipal facilities to handle. Helping those businesses grow in place is obviously important to local communities, and so this pretreatment capacity initiative is providing grants generally for partnerships between local businesses and the municipal wastewater facility to install what we refer to as a pretreatment practice, but to help reduce wastewater strength so that those businesses can grow in place. And look forward to being at Rock Art later this afternoon to celebrate one of the initial awards coming out of this program. That said, we anticipate actually either later this month or early next opening a 2nd round of pretreatment grant programs. For communities that aren't necessarily sure who's discharging what into their sewer system, there are also opportunities through the pretreatment program to do that kind of assessment work and identify businesses within your communities that may be making for challenging conditions at your wastewater facility.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Todd Eaton. I manage the Vermont Local Roads Program within V-Trans. What we do is we offer technical assistance, information exchange, and training to municipalities with regard to anything concerning your roadway. V-Trans doesn't have anything ARPA specific necessarily to offer, but we do have a lot of programs that could dovetail nicely with some other other projects that you are planning and working through. And so for this morning, what I brought is our Show Me the Money packet, which does provides some summary of a number of different state programs that might be of interest to you. And I also have another packet that summarizes a number of the different federal programs that might be of interest to you. I'll be here with questions, or you feel free to find us on our website at localroads.vermont.gov.
Good morning. Rounding out the presentation is June Tierney, Commissioner of the Department of Public Service. I'm also here today on behalf of Director Christine Hallquist, who heads up the Vermont Community Broadband Board operation that we have at the state. York County is particularly gifted in how you've organized yourselves around your communications union district, and quite a bit of ARPA funding has been directed toward that entity, as well as eligibility for other federal programs that are not necessarily ARPA funded. I have in mind the Infrastructure Jobs Act, where there's a lot of money flowing to the state of Vermont to fix our last mile connectivity problems. It's not enough money, and that's the message I want to get across to you. You folks are here handling a broad portfolio of public policy issues, every one of which has been touched upon here today, and broadband still remains among them. One of the challenges that we try very hard to think about for you at the state level is that it's not just about infrastructure, it's also about access and affordability. And as you heard from Commissioner Dunhill a moment ago in libraries, that's one place where society ensures that everybody can get access to the internet, which was a priority for us during the pandemic. You may recall the Wi-Fi hotspots and the like that the department rolled out. Not perfect, but the objective was to make sure that push come to shove, those could get access. But with the pandemic receding, the access issues remain, because in addition to physically and gear-wise and education-wise being able to get onto the internet, there's also the question of affordability. And that's where you folks have better eyes into your communities than we do. And so what I would ask is that if you have the first question about what your future of connectivity looks like, please don't hesitate to reach out to Director Hallquist or to her very capable Deputy Director Rob Fish. They have transformed our landscape in Vermont when it comes to our prospects for achieving last mile rollout, and they're very approachable. No questions too dumb to be asked. There is no such thing in this field. You also heard quite a bit here from Commissioner Fitch about the possibilities that you have open to you for pursuing energy resiliency. I'm not here to travel over that ground because the Department of Buildings and Grounds is implementing all of that good work that follows from policy work that's done at the department on matters of this nature. But if you have questions about it and for some reason you don't think to call Commissioner Fitch, think to call Commissioner Tierney. We will put you in touch with her. The thing to do is to breathe deep. Vermonters have a lot riding on your engagement as citizens, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We don't have interfacing county level government in this state, so that's why we're here today, is to reach you where you are and to have you hopefully reach us while we're here and beyond. There's a lot that we just don't know that you know, and if we don't know what we don't know, we can't reach across that gap. So please don't be shy. I know you're not. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Secretary Curley.
Great. Now I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Secretary Doug Farnham.
Thanks, Lindsay. So that was a lot. So I'm going to start off with an anecdote. So one of my first interactions with Commissioner Tierney, I'm former military, she's former military. We're walking outside of the State House, walking across, and we see Clay Purvis about 200 feet away. And June's like, hey, get his attention for me. And been out of the military for 7-8 years at that point in an office setting, so I yell, not nearly loud enough, and June just looks at me, like tilts her head a little bit and says, Clay! and from 200, effortlessly gets his attention from 200 feet away. I'm still mortified to this day that I didn't yell loud enough. But I think it's one thing, amazing thing about people and how dynamic they are. Commissioner Tierney, amazingly eloquent, soft-spoken. She wants to get your attention. She can get your attention. So
Valentine's Day was a month ago.
So why am I here? Deputy Secretary of Agency Administration, not normally at this type of event, not normally a lot of public interaction. So I think the context for that is that at the beginning of the pandemic, very early on actually, emergency management and AOA worked together and recommended the governor. The governor talked about it with the legislature. We implemented a centralized approach to building our CRF programs. So all of the CRF, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, that first $1.25 billion tranche of money that was given on extremely short time frame with kind of broad characteristics, we decided that agency administration would oversee how those programs are built to make sure that Vermont didn't cross any lines with the feds. And actually, if you're a nerd like me, you can go back and see where some of the states just did ridiculous things with some of that money, and the feds came in and said, whoa, no, what are you doing? So I think Vermont did an exceptionally good job of spending this coronavirus relief fund. We're actually one of the only states that had all of our money basically expended before the extension was given, so by the end of 2020. So we planned, we moved fast, and we really spent it in a way that made sense to both the governor and the legislature. Now that was all immediate response money, right? That all went into a lot of short-term uses, a lot of pandemic mitigation, helping the healthcare system. When the State Fiscal Recovery Fund was passed, and it was clear that Vermont was going to get the same, similar amount of money, $1.05 billion, the governor decided to utilize the same approach, to have AOA continue to oversee the construction of those programs, so that the decisions for how to build their programs weren't completely loaded onto each of the departments and agencies, so that they could have a centralized resource to help them build the programs, and try to build those in the most flexible and efficient way possible under the federal regulations. Federal regulations rarely make things simpler, but we have to follow them, and we don't want to have hundreds of thousands of dollars spent down the road on audits or having to send money back to Treasury and create a problem for a future Vermont government. So we took that approach. We built about 50 programs in the first year in 2021 and about 50 programs in 2022. We're over 100 ARPA programs built, right? Depending on how you categorize them, it's very difficult to figure out what's exactly a program and what's a sub-program, and we talk about it in different ways, so it's very confusing, but it's at least 80, and depending on how you label it. So of that $1 billion, all but about $1 million has been appropriated by the legislature. So it's all out on the table at this point, and that's why we're here talking to you all. About 2/3 of that money was put into these infrastructure style programs. That was very important to the governor to utilize the money in a way that set Vermont up for success in the long run. Now, there were still some tapering needs from the pandemic, some healthcare related spending, some short-term workforce development investments that aren't going to build Vermont structure, but are going to help us grow or help us get through kind of a rough patch. But roughly 700 million of that $1 billion was put in water, sewer, broadband, housing, childcare, the things that are really going to set us up and actually you see a strong return on investment for. And as a sidebar, actually, I've been working with ACCD on a program that evaluates the economic impacts of our non-standard, our non-economic development programs of our water, sewer, housing. And I think we have a long way to go until we are ready to talk about the results of that. But I do think it's very exciting to look at, okay, what does a housing development do economically for a community? What does a water sewer program do? And I think we all have an understanding that certain communities can't move forward without those infrastructures in place. And that's where, that's why we're out here, and that's why we've been kind of beating the drum for the last couple of months. So the current state of ARPA spending, we're actually about to collect our next quarterly report, so I don't have fresh numbers, but we are around 200 million of the 1 billion has been expended, money out the door. Over 400 million has been obligated. So we're getting close to that 50% mark where almost half the money has been obligated through a grant or a contract to someone. So the window of opportunity on ARPA is getting narrower, right? Programs are still running, but a lot of them are moving through applications and we'll see those grants and contracts. But it's not the only opportunity. The bipartisan infrastructure law that Commissioner Tierney mentioned, also known as the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, that package has a lot of formula programs that are going to increase Vermont's capacity to build roads, to do other things. And it has a lot of competitive programs mixed in there as well. And those programs are still rolling out, and they're going to be rolling out over the next like 4 years. Most of them will probably have launched in the next 2 years, but we're still seeing notifications of federal awards. We're still seeing initial guidance come out. And so that's one thing that I'm charged with tracking at the central level. Now, each program and policy area, they're going to keep an eye on their own stuff, but I'm also trying to function as a backstop and a coordinator. And over the next 4 years, it's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of opportunities, more than I think we've seen since potentially, well, definitely more than since ERA, but, and I can't think of another example since ERA. So that's my message partly, is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation and Reduction Act is also going to be producing a number of programs. The thing to remember about those is a lot of those are even more non-standard. So a lot of new programs, a lot of competitive programs, a lot of programs that will be eligible to businesses but not municipalities or the state. So that Inflation Reduction Act is putting a lot of money out there, particularly in climate change areas, but it's doing it in ways that aren't direct, and you have to engage and you have to research. And that's one reason I think that one in particular is going to be challenging for communities, but in a way that will have some great opportunities if you can take advantage of it. And I think all of that has led to a recent proposal. It was in the Budget Adjustment Act for AOA to have $3 million for technical assistance to offer to municipalities. And it's general fund, so it won't have kind of the federal strings that would go along with tracking and tracing the money and making sure the award is utilized to uniform guidance standards, which, another sidebar, I used to be the state's, this sounds arrogant, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. I used to be the state's lead tax nerd. I was the policy director for the tax department, and I was the tax nerd. If you had a tax question, I was the guy who researched it and figured it out, who worked on it, who talked about new tax laws. Now I ended up being the state's federal funds nerd. So that's kind of the niche I play. And I mention that because the idea is, behind that $3 million, is to provide more support, to provide more technical assistance, not directly, but working strongly through regional planning commissions, and also coordinating a list of vendors that can offer town support to scope out their needs, to do a community needs assessment, to see, okay, this is our vision for our community, but what do we need in order to get there, right? To do a federal funding opportunity assessment, to look at a lot of these programs that are out there right now and figure out, okay, well, this is what we want to do. What federal grants or state grants could we possibly get right now? Because sometimes what you want to do doesn't line up with the opportunities that are out there. And that can shift, what you end up doing and what parts you end up moving forward with. Grant writing, the application management process, trailing project management. I think that's one thing that's very difficult, particularly for smaller municipalities. Under normal conditions, it doesn't make sense for a small municipality to have a full-time grant manager or economic development manager on staff if you're a rather small community. As you get to be a larger community, it may make more sense. But in that gray area where you still want to grow, but you don't necessarily have a full-time resource, what do? Right? So part of the impetus behind the $3 million is to get money out there, get requests, and really do an assessment of who wants to move forward right now, which communities want to move forward, and who needs help moving forward. So in that effort, AOA produced a Vermont Communities Index. And I want to say, it's an index that looks at demographic and economic factors, and it sets up a pre-qualification. So in Lamoille County, there were 2 communities that were pre-qualified. Belvedere and Waterville ended up being pre-qualified. However, Eden and Wolcott are still relatively high on the index in rating the relationship between need and capacity. But regardless of, so the top 25% on the index would be pre-qualified for this technical assistance, meaning they could go to an RPC, they could go to a vendor that gets on the approved list, and they could get assistance for those different activities as long as they're related to water, sewer, housing, broadband, those, and broadband's normally going to go through the communication union districts, so that's, I think, probably less frequent. Or they can get approved for a project that's related to other economic development. That's more of a situation where if it's not one of those standard project types, they can come to AOA and get the support approved if it's a unique project and doesn't fit in any particular bucket. So that support is intended to help line up with ARPA programs right now that we have, the portfolio that we have out there, but it's not restricted to it, right? It could help your town prepare for participation in a bill program, participation in an IRA program, or even just normal state and federal funding 3-4 years down the road. I think one of the hardest things is sometimes the effort looks so monumental from the outset that we don't start. And part of the idea here is to get people started, to move the ball forward, and get people through those project phases. Because sometimes it can take 10, 15 years to get through from starting a community engagement process and figuring out what the community needs to having a fully realized new system put in. It can take a long time, and it should take a long time to make sure people get what they want and what they need. And it's not something that the state is just, pushing down on them. So I think the technical assistance, I'm really excited. It's in the Budget Adjustment Act, which as far as I know has not yet become law. It was delivered to the governor last week, and I still believe no formal action has been taken at this point. So if the BAA becomes law, AOA is immediately publishing an RFP to start getting the list of contractors, and has already been coordinating with the regional planning commissions to make sure we do this in the most effective and efficient way possible. And then over the next 3 months, between April and June 30th, we're going to be doing outreach to communities, reaching out to those pre-qualified towns first, and then towns between 74 and 50% next. And so what I would say to any community is, regardless of your place on the index, if you have a project and a request that really makes sense, I'm not going to let the analytics of the index override the facts and the reality on the ground, right? The index is intended to help us pre-qualify people, but it's not intended to exclude anyone. So every town in Vermont is technically eligible for this assistance. It's just a matter of just building a justification for an exception if there's really a good project, if there's really a clear need in a particular community. And the last thing I would say there is that regional coordination, particularly among smaller communities, like the example of 3 or 4 smaller towns creating an agreement to fund one economic development resource, because based on the size of their communities, like one resource could be shared between 3 or 4, that's kind of the ideal situation. And this money will move quickly, and we anticipate, my goal is to have most of it obligated or spoken for by the end of June, and all of it obligated by the end of this calendar year. But those obligations could be short ones, they could be 1 month, they could be 2 years. So it's short to long-term support. The conversations and who's going to get it should happen very quickly. And one reason it needs to happen quickly and why it was in the BAA is because, as I said, we're almost at 50% obligated for our ARPA funds. We want to give people the opportunity to get in the door. So there's a great deal of urgency to help people with that planning process and try to generate some more projects that are in other areas of the state. Because not just geographically, but when we ran the projects that we've approved at this point against the communities that scored lower on the index as far as their need to capacity relevance, most of the money was concentrated in the bottom 10% of the index. So the projects right now, and it makes sense from an anecdotal perspective, right? Larger communities, communities with more financial capacity, they're going to be able to submit applications faster. They're going to be able to submit more complete applications. So we really saw it come out in the data that the larger communities with more funds and more staff on hand, they were able to get in the door. And for all the programs, there's no way a state employee can say no to an application that looks great and does exactly what the program is intended to do. So the filter of this index is intended to help certain communities, try to help them develop projects if they want to, right? We're not going to be pushing anyone to participate. We're going to be going to every community that's on the list of higher need and really pushing them for do you want to participate in this or not? But if they say no, then that is their decision. This is it's very important that the communities want to move forward and want to, if you have a good community and you don't have any projects you want to do, then you don't have any projects you want to do. So, sorry for rambling a little bit, but very excited about the technical assistance program. So,
I think that's a perfect way to tee us up. I always, when I say we leave Doug as cleanup batter, but really he's like the how do we get to yes guy, right? So he's very creative about putting this all together. So thank you for summarizing that. Before I give the floor to you to sort of say, like, what can we help with? What are the barriers you're facing? What questions, what gaps are you feeling? I want to acknowledge we have some of your representatives in the room. Representative Boyden is here. Representative Lipsky here. Representative Noyes, I haven't found you in the room. Perfect. And our newest Representative Carpenter. So thank you for being here, and I'm really happy that you could join us today. Did I miss anybody? Okay, that wouldn't be good. So anyway, I don't know if anybody feels like going first, starting this off with a question or something that's perfect on your mind. If you would just introduce yourself and then fire away.
Eric Van, my question's actually with BGS, just kind of a timeline when the energy efficiency, the big grants are going to be out there to start working for us.
Yeah, great question. Thank you.
I'm not sure the others can hear his question, so if you don't mind just repeating the question for those that might not hear. No, that's okay. I just thought just because she's facing, so it might help. So
Sure.
Thank you.
So the question is, when will the up to $500,000 grants become available, which is a great question. So we are hoping to start opening up those this fall, if possible. And we may do something similar to libraries, where we kind of do that initial scan, where we ask communities to let us know what they're thinking in terms of the scope and the size and the scale of their projects and how many are out there. So we may follow that. Or we may just release the up to 500,000 grant announcement. I think we're just trying to get a handle on how much need there is out there, so that we can help better prioritize the funding and help us work with those communities as well.
Great. All right, in the back. Yes, sir.
With regard to those grants, will you have to have gone through the energy assessment process in order to qualify for the $500,000 grant?
So yes, you do need to do an assessment. Now, many communities have had assessments done in the last few years, and those assessments will count towards having an assessment done. But there are a few elements that are not typical in an energy efficiency assessment that also need to be assessed in accordance with the bill as well. So that's we're going to call like a gap assessment. So if most of your assessment qualifies, there might just be a little bit more work that needs to be done, and we'll come out to that community and we'll do that kind of gap assessment, if that makes sense.
Great.
So my name's Leslie White. I'm from Eden. I have a couple questions. I guess I thought this was going to be more tailored toward the money that we've already received, and how, whether there's some reporting issues or what we need to do if we've spent some of that money and what we can actually do. There seems like there's a little bit of confusion as to what we can spend the money on. And the next question is, if we have this chunk of money and we're not going to use it right away, can we put it in an interest-bearing account to make some interest and keep the interest?
This is great. Doug is so happy you asked this question.
So when you say the money you've already received, I am interpreting that to be the local fiscal recovery money that went through the state to the towns.
Right.
Right. That ended up being right around $300 per capita for each town in Vermont. And Treasury, when they their guidance was actually extremely helpful for Vermont's towns. So every town in Vermont, with the exception of like Burlington, can elect to classify their entire award of local fiscal recovery funds as revenue loss replacement. And what that means is you still have to obligate it and expend it by 12/34 for 2024 for obligating it and 12/31/2026 for expending it. However, you can put that money into anything with the exception of paying off, you can't put it in a pension, you can't use it to pay off previous debt. The Treasury describes it as putting it into general government services. So almost anything that you would normally spend your money on in the course of a normal budget, that ARPA money can be applied to that. And I do think it is very important for communities to sequester the money from a decision-making perspective and to really thoughtfully invest that money in whatever their needs are to get some long-term benefit. But from a mechanical perspective, what towns can do is do kind of basically an offset where you spend that money from ARPA on what might be normal government operations and create an amount of funding collected through your normal taxes that you can put into an account that could bear interest if you need more time to make decisions.
Velocity.
Sorry. So,
Okay, well, let's just take an example. We have $400,000 worth of ARPA money sitting here. It's in a separate account.
mhm.
We bought a laptop and,
Minimal things.
minimal amount of spending on that money. Can we take that money, we want to build an addition onto the town clerk's office. That's not going to happen in the next 2 years. Can we put it in an interest-bearing account that's FDIA insured, that gets better than 0.005% interest that we get now on our sweep account?
So not directly. So what I would recommend for the down the road details and making sure that you have it clear is that Katie Buckley really understands this process and understands the right way to treat the money. My recommendation in general is to, how to say this nicely, end the relationship with Treasury as soon as you can. So the sooner you can have your money spent for and accounted for and reported to Treasury and then file a closeout report, the easier your lives will be. The more you spread out the activity, if you spread out the activity over the next 3.5 years, it's going to be a lot more work for you. It's going to be a lot more reporting. So in order to move that, if you know that you have a construction project that you want to use the money on, like you said, yes, you could directly use the money for that construction project. That's within the revenue loss replacement rules. However, you'd have to have that building done by 12/31/2026. You don't want to unnecessarily put yourself under that pressure. So you could take the money and you could use it for municipal payroll. You could use it for almost any operating expense in the normal course of your town budgeting process, and then correspondingly move money into a capital construction account with those criteria you're looking for on the banking side to set up your financial ability to do the long-term construction project. And then you can do that project over the next, doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's legitimate from an accounting perspective.
So you're telling me to hocus pocus. Okay, fine. So.
No, I would say the Treasury has also, in their webinars, in their guidance, they have blessed this kind of approach as well. They don't want to maintain long-term relationships with the revenue loss money. That's why they created that threshold. So it's not even going against what the Treasury has really said. They really do want people to use it to bolster their operating accounts, and they're completely fine with that approach.
So we can use it to pay payroll, we can use it to pay our propane bill, we can
Yep.
use it to do all these things, and every time we pay for our propane or whatever, or fuel for the town garage or anything like that, then we just take that same money and put it into another account that says, basically, this is we can spend it as we want to account.
Yes, that's a legitimate approach.
Okay, all right. The next question is,
I just want to say, I know Doug made reference to Katie Buckley as a kind of another guru. She works for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, just for awareness.
Okay.
But Doug, isn't it the case that what we're really talking about is green dollars and red dollars?
I'm sorry, what?
We're talking about green dollars and red dollars. Let's call your ARPA dollars green dollars. And let's call your ordinary revenue that you raise through taxes red dollars. What Secretary Farman is saying is, when you spend, say, $1 million of your red dollars on payroll, you can instead take $1 million of your green dollars and spend it on payroll, and then move $1 million of your red dollars into a savings account and earn interest. And then when you're ready, you can spend your tax dollars that you raise to your town, red dollars on your construction project. And Treasury will have no problem with that whatsoever, because you will have spent $1 million of the green dollars on a legitimate purpose. You will have filed all the paperwork and the auditing and all that stuff, and Treasury will go, yay. That money is properly accounted for, we're done, you don't have to talk to you ever again. It's all above board.
This is
It's
going
not-
to take a little bit of convincing to the select board.
It will, and that's where Katie Buckley comes in, because it's not hocus pocus. It feels that way, but it's not.
Okay.
If the Treasury itself has set this up to make their lives easier, and the challenge for us here on the ground is to make sure that the dollars, the green ones, do what they're supposed to do, which is why the category of revenue replacement exists. The whole idea is to help every community replace revenue that might have been lost in the pandemic or that had to be spent in a different way, and things that you needed to be doing didn't get done. That's all.
I don't want to be a dead horse here,
You're not.
but, I mean, revenue replacement, we didn't lose anything in the pandemic. So we're not replacing anything. I just want to be absolutely sure.
You're right, let's be clear here. The language that we're using, it applies to every community in the state of Vermont, every community in the United States. So it may not fit your particular pattern in your community, but the rules are designed to apply to all communities in the United States. If you didn't lose any revenue during the pandemic, that's good for you. That means that those green dollars the federal government has sent you are that much more powerful.
Right.
All he's doing is answering your question, which was, can we put them in an account and gain interest? And the answer is yes, if you do it the way we just said. And if that's confusing, which is very understandable, because I had to learn this stuff too, go talk to Katie about it.
Okay.
Or talk to Doug.
So one more thing, I'll let somebody else speak. So in terms of getting an assessment on your building and energy assessment, I mean, I reached out to a number of different contractors to say, can you please do an assessment? And I received nothing in response.
So that's a great question, and
Because,
yes, thank you for asking
because
that.
you're, all these things you're saying are absolutely fabulous. Who is going to do this work?
We've got you covered.
Okay.
So we have 4 consultants that we're getting under contract right now,
Okay.
and those 4 consultants will be available to communities to do these assessments. So you should not be hiring any of your own people. That's why we're putting them under contract. All of the assessments will be authorized through BGS. And then we'll be working with the RPCs to coordinate all of those so that we're doing them most efficiently. So if I have 4 buildings that are in close proximity to each other, the RPC is going to know that. And so when we dispatch that person to go, or that company to go do that audit, the RPC is going to be lining those up so they can hit, 3 buildings in a day, versus we send one over here, and then we send one over there, and then we send one over here. So we got you covered.
All right.
We're also putting people under contract for ADA as well, to do ADA assessments. That's going to take a little longer because we just started that process. So I would anticipate minimum amount of time being 3 months, the maximum amount of time to get them under retainer to 6 months. We'll do everything we can to get closer to that 3-month time frame. But we recognize that what we're trying to do, as Deputy Secretary Farnham mentioned, is we're trying to make everybody's lives easier by making sure that we have resources for you. And so this is another way in which we're trying to make resources available to communities so you don't have to go out and find someone to go do an ADA assessment for you.
Okay, great, thank you.
In the front?
Aaron Calvin, News and Citizen. On that note, I just wanted to ask, I've heard a lot about the labor shortages that we're dealing with across the state. Sounds like there's a lot of money that's going to be put towards infrastructure and different projects like that. Has there been a concern or an assessment to, factor in the, higher cost or the delays that might result from lack of available labor?
I think it speaks to the advice that you just gave, was to the extent that towns can use their money on allowable costs now so that the clock that's ticking, right, they don't run out of time. Because if there are labor shortages or supply shortages, they don't find themselves out of time in terms of being able to spend that ARPA money. If they can spend it now on allowable things like payroll and other things that Deputy Secretary Farnham just described, that clock stops ticking. Now they have this pot of money and they can spend it as the labor is available and as the supplies are available. Did I understand your question? Does that help?
Can I
And
add?
Julie, you can add to that.
Sure. I mean, I think the concerns you're flagging are real. Certainly, we've seen them in some of the projects we put out to bid related to water infrastructure, where we many times in the past would have had multiple bidders and they only have one or two at this point. Costs are higher than projected. Generally, we're incorporating that and have a contingency factor in each of the contracts we're issuing for these major infrastructure projects. V-Trans, I know, deploys a similar approach. It's a real challenge. That said, the deadlines are what the deadlines are. They were established at the federal level. The intention for this funding is to spur economic activity, and so it's a delicate balance to be struck, but certainly something I think each of the funding agencies that does major infrastructure projects is very aware of. And one of the tools we're using is, just like Jennifer alluded to, trying to get consultants in areas of particular interest for this funding under contract, retainer contract with the state, so that we have a little bit of known capacity that we're able then to direct into these projects.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because to your point, not all of our projects, our programs, have the flexibility that we just talked about that some of the towns have, right? They are different in that we need to keep rolling here now, and we may hit these bumps along the way that are very real, so.
Yeah, we are, and on the capital investment projects, we are seeing increased costs and increased time horizons because of what you bring up. It is a very real issue, but again, we just got to keep
So
going.
run, don't walk to get in the door for these projects, because there are going to be some, more complications down the road.
I would even go further than that, which is
I can't hear what's going on.
Sure.
The question is, what the.
Oh, sorry. So the conversation is that we do have a very real problem in that we have labor and supply shortages, and there are programs that still have these deadlines. And the very real challenge is that we still have to move forward because the federal government has set deadlines. And so we don't have the luxury in many cases of just saying, well, don't worry about it, we'll push the deadlines back. We don't have that control. So we still need to forge ahead and do the best we can. So we're sort of openly talking about some of the things we're navigating with that. Labor shortage and supply shortage is a national challenge. So I will say that what we're experiencing here at home is national and even global for that matter. But we have a few different folks who are saying that we're already feeling quite an impact internally within our programs. So. Sorry to interrupt.
I know there's a question back there,
We can probably speak up a little bit too. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
So it's kind of a follow-up to both of the questions. And Leslie, by the way, Johnson will take Eden's money if you want. If you're worried about spending it.
No, I'm not worried about it.
So given the deadlines that we've got and what was said by the agency administration representative, would it be your opinion that if we committed the money by the end of 2024 by applying our total grant award to reduce our budget, that would meet the deadlines and requirements for the federal government?
So the Treasury defines that obligation deadline of 12/31/2024 as a grant or a contract, an external agreement. So one thing I would say is most of these awards were tailored to be somewhere around 75% of your budget. So it's probably going to take more than 1 year's worth of budget to, in a lot of cases, fully expend the award. Committing to spending it in a certain way internally, unless there's an agreement with a contractor or a grant, probably isn't going to be enough for Treasury. Payroll is always difficult with Treasury because they don't consider the payroll to be obligated basically until the employee has worked that time period. So if you're going to take the replacement approach in paying for your budget, I would say earlier is better than later. Try to have that money if it's going towards internal purposes, actually expended by the end of 2024. And that will be the best way to protect yourself. Because I know that if it's being spent internally, that does compress the time frame a little bit.
And as a follow-up is, if we offset anything that we spent in the budget, we could essentially put that money into a separate account and not have time constraints related to it.
Correct. That is then town money. Treasury is not going to look at it in any audit situation.
Oh, great.
I'd like to just make sure I understand the distinction between the ARPA stuff and the IIJA bill stuff. Those appropriation and implementation deadlines, do they apply to all three of those programs?
No. So just ARPA has the 12/31/2024 and 12/31/2026. The bill / IIJA, that has rolling programs. So many formula funding increases, which are going to have differing timeframes. Some of them have like this 5-year plus 5-year time frame that's going to be rolling out over the next 9 years, right? So IIJA is much more spread out. And many programs will have unique deadlines within that. So the nice thing about ARPA and CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund from before, they were centralized and they had one date and they were very consistent, and it was actually made it a little bit easier to understand that. With bill and IIJA and then Inflation Reduction Act, it's all moving parts. Some are formula, some are competitive, some are being offered right now, some won't be offered for another 1.5 years. So I would say there's going to be a waterfall of funding opportunities over the next 3 to 4 years in particular, but they'll all have different dates if they're not ARPA programs. And like I said, pretty much all of our ARPA programs are on the board at this point. There's going to be some small reallocations, most likely by the legislature, of programs that aren't spending all of their money, might get some of that money moved to other programs, but I don't think we'll be creating that many new programs.
But much of what we were hearing about in these new programs is that if it's not ARPA, it's the infrastructure bills. Zero.
No, other way around. Much of what you heard.
The
was
other way
ARPA.
around, it's all
Yeah,
ARPA.
much of what you heard was ARPA.
Yeah.
We are signaling to you that IIJA is coming. The chops you're building as local leaders, thought leaders, program managers, et cetera, are good because they're going to serve you when IIJA comes along with its deadlines and IRA comes along with its deadlines. But if you just think for a moment about how this funding came about, ARPA was in the heat of the moment in the pandemic. They dithered around for a good 2 years, or close to 2 years, in the first Biden term, or that it said the first 2 years of the Biden term, before they even agreed that IIJA would become law. So those are two different tracks. ARPA is very specifically targeted at pandemic recovery. IIJA, think of that as a massive infusion into previously existing public policy programs through federal agencies, to talk to state agencies, and here we are, state agencies talking to you. That funding is getting pushed out and will go into the aquifer of local politics and projects and eventually bubble up and hopefully the wonderful ideas that you folks can put to work. It's a lot to ask of you. So breathe deep and just remember, you can do this, we can do this, and that's why we're here, to help you feel like we got this. And if we're failing, just let us know.
So then just one of the follow-up ties in, Julie, are the water programs that you discussed part of the ARPA deadlines or the?
The initiatives I specifically mentioned this morning are all ARPA funded. That said, the governor has proposed an additional $10 million for the Healthy Homes program that would be general fund and so not subject to those deadlines. As you may be aware, the agency is also on track to receive about $340 million worth of bipartisan infrastructure law, water and sewer infrastructure funding for traditional wastewater and drinking water projects, lead service line replacement, work around PFAS, and other emerging contaminants. That's all separate from what I described here this morning and is on those more extended timelines.
also, go ahead.
So how can we, there are, sounds like some programs and some ARPA money that is geared towards the individual homeowner in a town. So how can we best disseminate that or motivate or inform our community of those opportunities?
So I can speak specifically to the Healthy Homes Initiative. And we have a listserv sign up. I can, if you see me afterwards, I can get your email address and connect you with it. We broadcast every time we open an application period to that listserv. We're doing our best to push that information out through all the channels we have, including RPC partners and the League of Cities and Towns, also word of mouth and some media releases. But would love to expand that email list to all of you so that as the next round of funding opportunities becomes available, it reaches as many people as possible. We know that the challenge is oftentimes that the folks who could benefit from these services least are sort of least connected into at least the interwebs, and electronic notices like that aren't super helpful, which is part of the reason we've reached out to radio and TV outlets too and attempted to gain coverage.
But part of it is informing people that that's the possibility, but helping them to that next step in the cheat sheet of the application.
Sure. And it's initially it's just providing contact information. We actually have staff on the team to specifically help homeowners complete those applications because Treasury guidance is at times complicated, and we know that can be a barrier to entry. So trying to make sure we're not excluding people by virtue of a complicated application form.
Okay. Hopefully you're all hearing a theme here that we as a team, yes, we work in different agencies and departments, but we very much are working together and trying to make sure that we're providing services that are easy for Vermonters to access. And again, you can reach out to any one of us, and even if we're not the expert in the matter, we're going to make sure that you're connected to the expert in the matter. So, that's what we really want to bring a message to you. I also want to, continue with questions here, but I want to just check in with Pat and Tasha as well. And just, again, great partners to us. They're great, obviously, resources to you all, but we're connected as well. So, to the extent that you're trying to figure out who to come to, you go to one of them, they can find us as well. So I wanted to just kind of draw that connection again. And if either of you have something, that you want to share or remind folks of in terms of, how you interact with them. Yeah, Tasha, that's.
I was just going to say, with given the recent town meeting, that Seth Jensen, Deputy Director, and I are going to be visiting all the select boards in the next couple of months to again review all of this information, because it's very important for everybody to have the opportunity to ask the questions, because there are also very many people who aren't here today.
I was just going to add on the CRRP, the Community Recovery Revitalization Program, there's one qualified census tract town in Lamoille County. It's Johnson. So if you're a Johnson person and you're thinking about applying, you should at least have a 5-minute conversation with me probably before you get to the agency even. The other thing about that, what we're seeing, and maybe this is some information for the agency as well, on the business side for the CRRP, we're getting a lot of applicants that are just not eligible. And unfortunately, they're getting to me late because they need our letter of support. So I just would like to get it out there that maybe just call us first and we can have a 5-minute conversation. And I can usually tell if you're on track to something that might qualify or if you're way off, and it just kind of saves everybody a little time, effort, and energy. I hope the agency's okay with that statement, but we've had that a lot in Lamoille County. I've seen so far. I don't know if you're seeing that around the state or not as well.
So you're saying you're pleased that businesses would first reach out to you so that you could give more guidance before they go through the
Yeah, we're seeing
energy of applying and then getting turned down.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have to reach us first, but they're going to get
It would
to
be
us
helpful.
eventually anyway.
Yep.
And we're seeing applications that are just, they don't qualify.
Right,
And
right.
it's a lot of time, effort, and energy spent on things that are not going to be.
No, I think that's a great approach, or they could also contact us at the agency, so.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. And, again, I'm not exactly sure of the mix. I've tried to observe, but this is a great opportunity as communities to really be thinking about those ideas you've had for years, those infrastructure projects, and collectively getting together as community hubs and trying to figure out how we get things over the finish line. Again, there's a variety of different opportunities here, and maybe none are perfect, but together maybe we can help you get them over the goal line. So, are there additional questions? I know we have a few more minutes. We have about 4 more minutes. So if there's other things on your mind, really, like housing, like broadband, like what keeps you up at night? What's making you worry? Oh boy, the hand went up.
The capacity question. Honestly, I think this is great. In my 12 years in SCO, this is the first time we've had this kind of outreach from the state level. And since I started seeing a bunch of money falling from the sky, we've attempted to try to position ourselves to advance scoping studies and things to that effect on a dozen different projects that we can. I think there's some opportunity here to some degree. The deadlines are going to crush us. And I think it's more than just stoking flow. And I think that there's capacity challenges within each of your departments that add to these deadline challenges. And if we're really going to pull something off, I would offer we have to figure out alternative avenues to get projects done. I'm a little surprised to not see more representation from V-Trans. And I think you guys got to think out of the box on how to fast track stuff, because if we don't, we're going to waste the opportunity.
I would say that the main reason there's not more representation from V-Trans is that transportation spending was explicitly prohibited in the ARPA spending. Now they changed that just recently, but they changed it after we had actually appropriated all of the funding. So roads weren't really part of the conversation at all when the policy decisions were being made by the governor and the legislature, because the federal language said you cannot spend it on general infrastructure and roads.
That's helpful.
So that's the main reason we're not talking about roads as much right now. I'd say with the capacity, one thing, I work closely with the state's chief performance officer, and all through the pandemic, one of our big focuses has been, trying to use some of the tools that exist now that didn't exist, 5-10 years ago, to get things done that would have taken 3 or 4 people. And so we are basically able to leverage more tools to do things more efficiently. Now, with capacity, that doesn't work when you're talking about building a building, right? Like it takes a certain amount of people to build a structure. But one way we can do it is, look at how we're picking projects, instead of spreading ourselves out thin and trying to do, 5 dozen projects, focus on 20 good projects. So I think we are trying to put those lenses in to make sure we spend the money. On the time frame perspective, similar to the discussion around what towns can do with their local funds and the revenue replacement treatment there, for about $240 million out of the $1 billion, the state has some similar options that we can use to make sure we don't send money back to Treasury. We're not focusing on that, right? Because that's only about 20% of the money. And we really want to make sure we're not, our right behind making sure we're doing the right project is making sure we don't send money back to Treasury. We want to make sure that money gets spent well, but we also, want to make sure it gets spent. And even though we had very serious capacity issues, what I've seen, I used to work at the tax department. One of my earlier roles was the property valuation director, so I worked a lot with the towns. And Vermonters care a lot about their communities, and when you care, you make things happen. And I do think, like with the Coronavirus Relief Fund, we were one of the fastest states on spending our money, even though proportionally we had much more money than pretty much any other state except Wyoming. So we got it done. We were ready to file our report in January of 2021 saying we spent the full $1.25 billion. And I'm confident Vermont will get there as well. It's going to be a hard couple of years. There's probably going to be changes. And like you said, we're not going to be able to get all the projects done that we want to get done. But I think honestly, like thinking big and getting focusing energy on some of those bigger projects that are going to be really impactful is one way we can succeed. And this sounds cynical, but as far as getting all the projects done, the inflation does help us a little bit in that regard. And that we literally can't do as many projects as we thought we were going to do 3 years ago because of the inflation. So the book of work actually, it was shrunk by the inflation. So yes, we have a capacity issue, but the higher costs also translate into fewer projects, which requires less workforce. Yeah, and sorry for mumbling at the end.
No, you're not mumbling. I want to speak to the emotional aspect of what you just said, because that sounds like fatigue to me.
I'm sorry, something what?
It sounds like fatigue to me.
Fatigue.
And if I were in your shoes, I mean, I'm very tired after 7 years of being the Commissioner of the Department of Public Service. And what keeps me going every day are the things that I'm passionate about as the Commissioner of the Department of Public Service. One of those things is climate change. The other is broadband. And they are linked together. If we have great connectivity, we have the ability to do a lot in the space of climate change. It gets very tiring to keep chipping away at it day after day. There's so much need in the state coming through my department that I could easily throw myself at all of it and get nothing done. And so what I choose to do in my space is to direct my energy toward the thing I'm most passionate about. Now, if I were a community leader like you are, or any number of people in this room who are doing so many things and wearing so many hats, I know you have to bring along people who are volunteers, people who are already tapped out, they have a job, and they're doing community civic stuff on top of it. So if you have to make a choice about what you can get done with this money, direct it towards the thing that you know your helpers, you know that your allies are passionate about. Because it's passion that's going to get you through what seems like this monumental task. And it is monumental, let's be clear, folks. The federal government has not dispersed this kind of spending since the Great Depression and the FDR protocol of works projects, all of that stuff. The Great Society was wonderful following, but it followed in the wake of what FDR did. It's that level of change we're talking about with this funding, starting with ARPA, going to IIJA. So of course it is tiring. Of course we don't know how to do this. That is one of the legacies this generation can leave for next generations, is figuring out how to do it. Because we know the needs are there. So when you get tired, give me a call.
And I have one other thing to share, at least in the buildings world, and this might be a little scary. But in the buildings world, we're actually seeing that large projects are being pulled out of. So we've actually gotten some calls in the last few weeks from contractors who are looking for work because some large projects have been canceled. So yes, I do agree that there will be capacity problems. There's no doubt about it. But I also believe that, to June's point, this may be the nexus for making sure that we're still spurring economic development, regardless of what may happen in the market.
That's a great point, Jennifer. I've experienced that personally too, with thinking it was going to be hard to find somebody to help, and it was because of another canceled project. It was actually quite easy. So good to remind us. So anyway, we're over time. We will. Some of us, I think, probably will linger for a few minutes. So if you want to try to grab us individually, that's totally fine. I want to thank you for your time. I know that it is a lift for some of you, many of you, to take time away from your day jobs and your daytime responsibilities to come join us, but we're really happy to be in Lamoille County today, and great to be with you. So thank you.
Thank you.